Hey, what is up everyone? So it's been a year since we got the conclusion to the Monkey Island Tall Tales, and if you remember going back a year ago, we were basically in a content drought for Sea of Thieves. Season 9 was not that well received, it was really a lot of just smaller minor changes to the game, but nothing really substantial like what we've gotten say with Season 12 or Season 13 recently. We also had Season 10 being significantly delayed. I believe it was probably our longest delay for a season we've ever had. I think we had Season 9 last like 7 months. It's been a while since that happened, so I'd have to look back and check exactly. But the Monkey Island Tall Tales were kind of like this bright spot in the storm, where we add 3 new Tall Tales that are coming to the game, and this is following off of the Pirate's Life Tall Tales, which I think are widely regarded as being some of the best content that Sea of Thieves has in the game. So I was extremely excited with the Monkey Island Tall Tales despite not being super familiar with the Monkey Island brand. In case you don't know, Monkey Island is basically a game series that's been going on for a long time now, and it's kind of like a point and click adventure game. I don't know if they have any others that are different than that, but most of what I've seen and what I've tried out since these Tall Tales released are like a point and click adventure thing where you like have to find like different items and stuff in like different rooms and do like puzzles and that kind of stuff. And it's pretty fun. Obviously these Tall Tales and Sea of Thieves are a very different type of game, but I think Sea of Thieves adapted the original source material pretty well. So now that we're a year later, when these Tall Tales came out, I wasn't the most favorable with them. I thought the first one was good, it had a pretty decent start to it, but then I felt like it kind of went downhill with the second and third Tall Tales. Now that we're a year later, I wanted to go back, replay through these 3 Tall Tales, and try to see if my thoughts have changed since then. So with that, let's go ahead and get into this. Something positive to start with. The best part of all 3 of these Tall Tales are how all the NPCs have voice dialogue for basically everything that they say, which makes the whole world much more immersive. I really wish the rest of Sea of Thieves was like this because having to read dialogue usually takes me out of the game and I often just kind of skip through and ignore it. I also think that the 2 islands we visit are probably the best rails ever made. The environmental work and detail everywhere, especially with Melee Island, are amazing. It was weird to me we kind of jumped into the middle of the story instead of being able to experience the beginning due to it being told through a time-limited adventure. Obviously last year when this happened, it wasn't really a big deal because the adventure had just happened. But now if you think about like all the people that are coming from the PlayStation platform that weren't around for the adventure to happen, or maybe people that are just newer and didn't experience it in general, you're gonna jump into the story and really not have any idea what's going on, because in the adventure that preceded the first Tall Tale, we basically find out that there's this dark version of the Pirate Lord, and we accidentally help this version steal the corrupted Blade of Souls, which had further story implications from earlier on through other adventures on Tall Tales. So without that context, it does make it a little bit jarring to hop into these Tall Tales and just see this blade appear in the villain's hands. While I love the idea of adventures, adventures should not be explaining important details for Tall Tales, like how the villain got his power. Obviously, I think adventures were great for other aspects of the game and the story, but this did not make any sense. In retrospect, having the beginning of the story coming from a time-limited adventure was just not great for long-term replayability. The first Tall Tale is pretty straightforward and the most fun to me despite being limited to a pretty small area. For the first Tall Tale, we're on Melee Island and you only are exploring basically the city and the port area. The rest of the island is covered in this fog, which my opinion has changed a bit since last year. Last year I kind of talked about how it was a bit disappointing that the first Tall Tale kind of felt like the demo for Monkey Island essentially because the rest of the island was locked off. But now a year later, I really feel like the first Tall Tale was the best one, and having it limited to that small area actually made the whole Tall Tale feel a lot more streamlined and focused. Everything we did in the first Tall Tale really flowed well together, and it felt like the story was naturally progressing, and you basically kind of instinctively knew what to do next. You'd have situations that just felt natural to complete, and you weren't really having to be told what to do, or having to look up a guide, or really have to think too hard about what exactly you're supposed to do. I didn't really ever feel aimless while I was playing the first Tall Tale. Whereas with the second and third one, sometimes it did feel like you had to work a little bit harder, or you might have just been kind of looking around like, okay, what do I do next now? Whereas this one, I really didn't feel that way. Also, another side note, I also really love the scrum bar that they have on Melee Island. It just feels very dynamic with all the pirates in there, hanging out and stuff, and it just feels very lively. So I was really interested in that part because I feel like the rest of the Sea of Thieves world can sometimes feel empty because it's meant to be filled by real players and not NPCs. As you don't really want to confuse people with that. So it's nice to have these tall tales that can kind of get away from that and really bring life to the game. So going back to what I was saying before, everything with the first tall tale really did flow well together, as opposed to the other two tall tales, which were both designed with requiring players to do like 3 parts to progress, which felt like it was dragging out the tall tale and not in a good way. I also really love the connections to the Pirate's Life Tall Tales, which makes the Sea of Thieves world feel more cohesive and not like these collabs are separate entities from each other. These connections can be seen in stuff like the Cursed Captain returning in the Scrum Bar, or the inclusion of the Black Pearl. The second Tall Tale has a lot of great ideas, but becomes quite dull after being dragged out for so long. The second Tall Tale really should have just started immediately with lifting the fog across the entire island. It felt like we were retreading territory from the previous Tall Tale because we have to do stuff in the same area again. Whereas, in my opinion, it should have just been like, okay, the potion's ready now that we've called you back or whatever, so you can go ahead and, go up to the top of the mountain and lift the veil and start the rest of the Tall Tale. That should have been how it happened, but with this, you basically have to do this whole beginning portion in the Melee Island area that you did the whole first Tall Tale at, and then you get to do the rest of it. And it just makes the whole experience a lot longer, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but to me personally it felt like my time was being wasted. Once the fog is lifted, the tale becomes more fun with essentially 3 main trials for you to complete. However, I can't help but get annoyed at what appears to be things that are wasting my time again. Essentially, there are a lot of ideas and things that were done in this Tall Tale that at first are really good ideas and really fun, but then they are overstaying their welcome. The treasure hunting trial kind of felt like this, where each one you found made you have to go find another thing to dig up. I give this one a slight pass, since it was a nice way to explore the whole island. Essentially, by the time you finish, you've gone around the entire island and you kind of get this nice scenic tour. But I noticed this continue in other areas, with my favorite trial dealing with thievery. When you go to Stan, you have to talk to him about every single ship, rowboat, and part before you can continue. My first time playing this, I found it enjoyable because I think Stan being able to walk around with us is quite impressive. However, on replay, I found myself annoyed that I had to just wait for him to continue talking and catch up to me and walk to the different things when I really just kind of wanted to move on to the next part. I'll come back to this in a moment, but the most egregious time this happened was with the insult sword fighting. This is by far the coolest and most unique idea in this Tall Tale, but it far overstays its welcome. First, you have to train with the Swordmaster to learn how it works, which is completely fine to me. Of course, it makes sense that you have like a training area for this where you can like practice because it's a new type of mechanic. But then if you want to finish this trial, you have to fight in all these extra battles where you are forced to lose over and over again because you don't have the right insults to use. The fact that there's no chance of you winning these fights, as well as having to do so many of them, really makes me hate this part of the Tall Tale. What should have by far been the best part of this Tall Tale really overstayed its welcome. At the very least, I wish on replay you were able to keep your insults that you learned, so you didn't have to go around and relearn them again. Each of these on its own aren't a big deal, but all together it just made me bored and ready for it to be over, which is definitely something you don't want players to feel when they're playing your game. Each of these little things on their own aren't a big deal, but all together, it really makes the Tall Tale as a whole feel boring, and I'm just ready to be done with it when I'm playing. I had hoped replaying these Tall Tales a year later would have changed my mind a bit more on this, but it just did not. I think if they wanted to have these long Tall Tales, they probably should have broken them up into several smaller Tall Tales, or at least make the gameplay a lot more interesting so I just don't become bored. The Pirate's Life Tall Tales I think did this great. They were, I think, the right amount of time for what they were doing, and I just never got bored with them, and it's so disappointed to see these Tall Tales miss the mark. The third Tall Tale has a decent ending with the church scene and the final battle, but again we continue to see things that drag out playtime and make me bored. For example, the final chase in the Lair beneath the island, like the insult sword fighting, is really cool and exciting at first, but goes on far too long and just leaves me bored and unsatisfied. And I'm not trying to say long Tall Tales are bad, but boring gameplay to increase the time that you're spending in the Tall Tale just kills any good gameplay that is actually buried inside of it. I truly think these Tall Tales would have been a lot better received if it was a lot more streamlined and removed some of the bloat, like the long winding Lair chase. It's really quite astonishing how long you actually spend just slowly following LeChuck's ship in this underground lair. It's like kind of comical at a certain point because you're kind of just sitting there like, did they really just make me sit here for this long doing this? I couldn't believe it. As for the rest of the third Tall Tale, if I'm being honest, I just really didn't care for any of the gameplay in this tale. Some stuff was alright, like the trap with Herman, but that part went on for way too long, and again it was just like some of the other stuff we've talked about already, where it's like you have to go find something and then it basically tells you, oh, now you have to go find another thing that goes from this, and then you have to find another thing and another thing. It's all just very fetch questy to me, and it's just not something that I enjoy playing. A side note though, the recent change they made to the game where you're able to run while carrying one-handed items really helped me in certain areas of this Tall Tale where you have to carry stuff long distances, like the key that I had to unlock a thing. Another thing I will say about this Tall Tale that I think it did well was the subtle things to draw your attention and inform you of what to do. Stuff like the smoke from Herman's camp, or how some things will shine in order to show you where to go, are nice ways of guiding the player. While I did find Melee Island more impressive, certain areas like the jungle or the mountains areas on Monkey Island were really fun to explore. Out of all three Tall Tales, I see this as the weakest one, but I think there are good elements that are just buried in a lot of filler. Looking at all the Monkey Island Tall Tales as a whole, I feel like if they wanted to include all these activities, it maybe would have been good to expand these Tall Tales to include a fourth tale. Perhaps we have the first two Tall Tales on Melee Island like we currently do now, and then have the final two Tall Tales on Monkey Island, where all the Lair stuff below the island can be saved for the fourth Tall Tale. I honestly think a lot of the problems with these Tall Tales is just how long they feel, and if they wanted to include all this content, just break it up, and honestly it probably would have been received better because then it would be perceived as more content. Because if you're comparing the Pirate's Life Tall Tales compared to the Monkey Island Tall Tales, a lot of players were kind of criticizing, saying, oh, we got 5 Tall Tales with the Pirates of the Caribbean stuff, but only 3 with Monkey Island. Where I would argue that the Monkey Island Tall Tales are probably similar in length to the Pirate's Life Tall Tales, but it's just all combined into 3 instead of being broken up into 5. Hopefully that made sense. I know that was a bit of a ramble there. In its current state though, I would recommend utilizing the checkpoint system for these Tall Tales to break up the gameplay so you're not just forcing yourself to complete everything in one sitting. I think breaking it up makes it a lot more enjoyable, but that just might be me, and maybe you want to do it all in one sitting. Let me know in the comments below what you think about that. In terms of legacy, I find myself having pretty similar feelings to those I had a year ago. I think these Tall Tales lead the way with environmental design, as well as fully voice-acted NPCs, which make the world feel far more real. I also think a lot of the puzzle gameplay done here, specifically with the first Tall Tale, should be incorporated in more aspects of the game and future Tall Tales going forward. In comparison to the Pirate's Life Tall Tales, the Monkey Island Tall Tales are definitely not as good. The storytelling, world building, and gameplay were all much better in Pirate's Life as opposed to the Monkey Island Tall Tales. With the Pirate's Life collab, we also saw a lot of changes to the rest of the Sea of Thieves world that have lasting impact. We got stuff like the Tridents as a new weapon in the game, along with major expansions to enemies available in the world, with sirens, ocean crawlers, and phantoms being added. With Monkey Island, we really only got ziplines, which took almost a year to be added, which makes it kinda hard to say that it was included with the Tall Tales. I also just don't really think ziplines in the open world are as impactful to the game as tridents or new enemies. Honestly, if these Tall Tales brought the voice acting to all the NPCs in the game for all the dialogue that they have, that to me would be extremely impactful and really help the legacy of Monkey Island in Sea of Thieves. Other than that, I found that even a year later there are still bugs with these Tall Tales, such as characters not having any sound when talking in certain places. I really would have hoped that these would have been resolved a year later, but I'm still dealing with bugs with these tales. I really wanted to give these Tall Tales another chance, but to be completely honest, my opinion really hasn't changed that much since a year ago. But despite my criticism, I do think the game overall is much better with these Tall Tales, which expand the content available in the game. I just wish some of these tales were slightly reworked to be a bit more streamlined and more enjoyable. Let me know your thoughts on the Monkey Island collab in the comments below, but that's all I have for this video. If you enjoyed, it'd be great if you like and subscribe, And until next time, thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time. Bye, y'all.